Hey everyone, it's Lucas. Today we're talking about Rocannon's World by Ursula K. Guin, her first novel, published in 1966, and book one of what was later referred to as the Hainish Cycle. This is the first book of hers that I've read, and I thought I'd use this opportunity to try to go through her works in publication order and just see how her writing style developed and how the legacy of one of the greatest authors of speculative fiction was created. For those of you that don't know, the Hainish Cycle is primarily a science fiction series, and then she'd go on to create Earthsea, which is mostly fantasy as far as I understand. Knowing this, I went into this expecting more of a science fiction standard plot, and what I got was kind of a mishmash between science fiction and fantasy. The overarching plot, generally speaking, is mostly science fiction. You got a lot of elements of like interdimensional travel, you got a empire kind of situation that rules over an intergalactic system, but the actual story itself takes place on a single planet, and a lot of the elements kind of follow a hero's journey, which I feel is more of a fantasy trope. And a lot of the interactions that the main character has with non-human species match those of a lot of the stereotypes, I feel like, of what a standard fantastical kind of character would be like. You've got a people that kind of resemble dwarves in a way, and you've also got some maybe creatures that strike you as more similar to something like the Nazgul. This book's interesting in that it kind of hits that balance between science fiction and fantasy, and not just in like the story content, but also in the writing manner as well. You'll have portions of the book where you kind of even forget that there's science fiction at all in this story. It's just a standard hero's journey with this group of adventurers exploring this new area. It's very whimsical in nature, but there's portions as well where it kind of leans more into that detached science fiction-y feel, where the main character Rocannon is he studies the different cultures on this planet before the events of the story, and you get a more of a detached relationship where he's kind of just observing what's going on and how they differ from other things that he sees. My favorite part of the story actually was the prologue, which was published as a short story a couple of years ago, Semley's Necklace. It's about 20 pages, and as a self-contained short story, I imagine nothing really needed to be continued off it, but it also works really well as a prologue for the story. She kind of took the initial concept of what was going on and kind of expanded it into the novel. I really enjoy the prologue because it strikes the best balance between these two genres, in that there's this main character of the prologue who isn't Rocannon, it's a different character. She's kind of on her own adventure, and it follows kind of a mythological, kind of like fable story. While on the other hand, you get the science fiction aspects of what's going on, but at this point in the story, you're completely lost on what's going on. It's just kind of fascinating. I think once the actual main part of the novel starts is when the book kind of starts to lose me a little bit. I think it's really ambitious, and I appreciate what Le Guin went for. I think a first novel, a lot of the times, is kind of a safe bet. And when you only have 150 pages paperback, 5-hour audiobook to kind of get your story across, I think it's easy to kind of just leave a lot of things on the table. But she really doesn't in this story. I think she goes for it, and unfortunately, not all of it lands. It's kind of part of the reason why the legacy of the book is not as great as some of her other works, but there's a lot to appreciate in this still. I have two main issues with this story. One is the lack of emotional impact that I really have with these characters. I don't feel like there's really meaningful connections being made. And I think part of that's just the brevity of the story. And it's kind of a standard thing that I feel like when I read a lot of these older stories is they tend not to expand on character interactions and kind of just streamline themselves through the plot at points. I think the second thing, and probably the main issue that I have with this story, is just some confusion that's going on and some convolution that I felt was unnecessary. Part of having a really ambitious book like this is you kind of have to land what's going, and you have to explain some things to the reader. I get the feeling that Le Guin's a really subtle author, and that she doesn't really want to take the time to explain a lot of the things that are happening. But in a book like this, there's certain portions where not so much thematic elements, but just story elements of what's going on at the time needed a little bit more of an explanation, because I just felt like I was lost at points trying to understand what was going on. I think if it was more of a thematic element, I would be more forgiving of it, because that's kind of what makes you come back to a book after you've finished it, is thinking about what's going on and if you really perceived what was going on the same way that the author intended you to. This book, I'm not going to go back and think about whether Rocannon went in this direction to do this thing or like what he was doing at the time, because it was just unclear of what was going on. This is one of those books that I wouldn't really recommend it. I think it's a fine book and it's a very short investment. If you want to take the time and you're a Le Guin fan, yeah, sure, pick it up. But it's not by any means necessary. And as a self contained story, I doubt it really has any relevancy later in the series. So that's all I really have to say about Rocannon's World. It's a decent, if a little unremarkable story, and I'm glad I read it, and I'm excited to continue on with her works. Next up, Planet of Exile, Book 2 in the Hainish Cycle, and I'll see you guys later.